Hello everybody, welcome to WhatCulture Gaming. I'm Scott, joined by Josh.
Hello, Scott.
Hello, my friend. Now we're playing the latest game, Sifu from Slow Clap, the dudes that made Absolver. Big old martial arts fest, very challenging, very much getting a reputation for being one of the most difficult games on the market right now. And considering that I've been playing it since Sunday afternoon and you dove in last night, we thought we would just literally get into head first, address the idea, is this one of the most difficult games on the PlayStation 5? Is it deserving of that reputation it's slowly building? And is this the next Returnal? Because I very much had, or did, a bit of a 180 last night on it, where I was sort of, bashing my head against the way the death system works. We'll get into all these different things. And the fact that you do have to replay large chunks of the game over and over again to grind out enough abilities to eventually get through it. And then things just started to click even more, and I overcame those obstacles, and it felt incredibly rewarding. And I just had that thing where I was like, okay, this is why it isn't Returnal, because for me, Returnal reduced me to a fine paste, and I never felt like I was learning anything. Whereas in Sifu, I always know what I've done wrong and how to improve. But I'm going to pass it over to you for a sec. What do you think of the overall reputation it's slowly getting, and how have you found the difficulty?
Yeah, I think it's deserved. I feel like you touched on it really well when you called it, rewarding. There is such an immense sense of reward when it comes to learning the mechanics, learning the levels, learning specific enemy types, and overcoming that challenge. It's way harder than I expected it to be. While I had followed the trailers for the game, I hadn't really dove into how the game works. So to find its structure was not what I expected. Like you said, you've got 5 levels essentially, and you have to essentially master each level so you have a good standing going into the next. There's the whole age system whereby every time you die, you grow older, and that kind of ticks up the more you die and the more you don't reset your death count, as it's called in the game. So you're essentially trying to not only get through a level, but master that level. Try to take as few hits as possible, and that loop is just so satisfying and so rewarding when you get it right. We're still quite early doors. We're only up to the 3rd level, I think, each.
Third boss, yeah.
And, getting through them, it brings a sense of relief, but going back to them, like you said, replaying certain sections, in mastering the controls, mastering all of the abilities and combos I have at disposal, that's, to me, it just instantly clicked, and I can't wait for work to finish, these videos to end, so I can go back and play a bit more.
No, I'd same. I think the thing that's worth pointing out is that it has a roguelike structure. Like, you are trying to do a run as best you can. Like the age mechanic, you start age 20, you get a death count every time you go down. You get one number added to that death count, which then in total gets added to your age. So if you're struggling with an area and you die 6 times over, all of a sudden you're 26. You die for a 7th time, all of a sudden you're 33, and so on. And you can only go up to 75 before you have to restart the overall area. And the game is only banking the age that you're on when you start each, one of the 5 areas to get through. So you're trying to get through each area and finish that area on a young enough age so that you have enough surplus time left in your lifetime to get through the final challenges. So, me and you were saying last night that we banked the first area and we tried to finish it. I think we both came out of it at age 27. You went back, made sure that you got out age 22, meaning you only died twice. And that meant that you had a better standing for the future levels to come. And so it is also that feeling of potentially boxing yourself in where, for me right now, I'm on the 3rd area, age, I think it's 43 or so. And in my head, I'm like, well, I've got about 30 years left of death that I can sort of cash in to get me through the upcoming areas and stuff. But it is also that feeling of I could get to the 5th and final area, and then maybe I'm age 65 and I have only 10 deaths in total to sort of cash in, and then realize that, hey, actually I'd be better off going back to the 2nd area or the 1st area and rerun that from the beginning, reset my overall age so that I have more age to use later on. And I think that's the reason, that's the mechanic that a lot of people are focusing on, just saying this is going to put a lot of people off because you're going to have to be up for, replaying a lot of the game over and over again. And we can address the way that they make those levels fresh, or they try to. But what do you think of that way of sort of min-maxing the age mechanics so that you have, every time you die early on, you're aware that you're robbing yourself of more deaths later when you might need them more?
Yeah, to me, it adds a layer that I didn't know I needed from this game. I like that this kind of, strive for perfectionism in your own techniques is what gives the game like a longevity. Like you mentioned there, you could get through this entire game, just kind of pushing your age. If you go into level 3 at 40 and trying to get out of that situation, you could do the game in that way. You could just about slip through and you could complete it. But I think the fun of this game is going to come in finishing this game age 70 versus trying to get that age down as much as possible, trying to get to the end of the game age 60, age 50, age 40, age 30, age 20 maybe, just doing it all in one big run. And that's kind of a Yeah, someone definitely will, but that's a double-edged sword because it's definitely going to put a lot of people off, like you said, it's not something you can easily, pick up and play. You are forced to learn this game and its mechanics and its levels, and while I'm enjoying that in the early doors, I do worry in some way about repetition maybe sinking in, and whether or not it has the variety in the levels that other roguelikes, proper roguelikes have, because there's nothing procedurally generated in this. There are secrets and shortcuts to find in the levels, but every time you jump into it, you're facing the same enemies in the same way. You're just trying to beat a very specific challenge, and that's really good. That's something that I enjoy, but it might put a lot of people off who are like, I don't want to fight this dude for 10 times before I can progress.
Well, that was the feeling I had last night, where I was like, they give you, because already there's a massive difficulty roadblock in the second boss. A lot of people are already struggling with him. There is a very much a technique to that second boss. Hold L1 a lot and wiggle the left stick and you can avoid pretty much everything. Don't worry about anything else. But there is that feeling of only being given 2 areas to grind out over and over again. And the way that you unlock new abilities is only when you die or if you find statues in the level. But you are always gaining XP. So if you just sort of grind those levels out on a long enough time frame, if you're banking that XP in permanent upgrades, which is where you buy the same thing 5 times, eventually you'll have that ability forever. So then you are stronger out the gate and you'll assumedly last longer on your next overall run. And that will slowly get you through the whole game. I know that's the whole roguelike, the appeal of the genre is that slow cog turn of getting everything in your favor and eventually having that one glorious run that gets you all the way through it. But at the same time, you can argue that crunch point comes a bit too early when it is just the second boss. And I guess we'll see how people are getting on, whether they are stuck on that boss or not. One way they do try and freshen up the earlier areas, though, are by giving you shortcuts. You do find different key cards, different ways to get through different pathways that cut out part of the level and get you to the boss faster, which is what Returnal did and what various roguelikes do. I did also realize that in later levels, you might find a code that will work in a keypad in an earlier level, so you can go back and use that. But yeah, I guess what do you think of the level design and the way that they have that grindy aspect and the point that they choose to reinforce it? Like, did you hit that pretty early, or did it feel like this is right? Okay, I should grind some stuff out before I do more?
It's weird because I think this game is it really illuminates the kind of player you are. For me, I didn't even want to move onto the club until I knew that I had a good standing in the first level. You said at the start, we both exited at age 27, but I was like, I can do better than that. That was my first goal. I'm sure I can get that down. So I spent an hour just throwing myself at level 1 over and over again. So I had all of the secrets, so I had the best standing. And eventually it worked, but I was kind of wondering whether that was the fault of the design or whether that's just kind of me as a player and what I'm inclined to do. There's probably people who don't mind what age they get in the first level and just want to move through them, learn them that way, rather than just repeating one over and over again. But like you said, there are things that shake it up. The shortcuts are incredibly welcome, and the fact that you can find items in later levels that call back to previous ones does keep them fresh. It just kind of, by nature, it lacks that procedurally generated elements. So like I said, you are doing the same thing over and over again. And while I think that's really good because it does allow me a really specific set of challenges to master, I do kind of worry how people might bounce straight off that because you, like you said, you had this kind of 180 last night where you were wondering whether or not it was going to be for you, whether or not you had the patience for it, or whether or not you can be bothered with another game like this. But then once it does click into place, I didn't really kind of find myself being bothered by that repetition. Right where I am now, it's great.
The thing is, because they, I called it last night to you the abuse genre, because it's like Sekiro, obviously all the Soulsborne stuff, Sekiro, Returnal, Cuphead, there are all these games that are just sort of, no, do it exactly like this, or we're going to punish you for not getting it right. And thankfully, Sifu doesn't fall into what put me off Cuphead over time, which was just memorize every single animation or you're not going to be able to get through it. Sifu is nicely improvisational, especially when you start unlocking different abilities, like, kicking items off the floor or interrupting different combos or being able to tank some of the hits so you can counter instead. You do get better over time, but it is that feeling of this sort of, how close to the idea of impossible do they want to play it to reinforce the idea that you are learning a lifetime's worth of Kung Fu, or Pai Mei, I think it is in this case, or Pak Mei, versus the idea of, making something that people are actually going to see the end of. Because I think the Platinum has 0.01% of acquisition at the minute. It's like one person has it. And so but I think it's a great card to play because when you finally do master it, or you get close to, mastering a certain level, things get insanely satisfying. And it is that Sekiro flow state where you're just sort of taking stuff on, your muscle memory blocking everything. You are just aware that you've massively improved as a player. to the point where your reflexes are that much better. And you wouldn't get that if they didn't enforce it so strongly.
Totally, and like you said, the repetition actually makes those moments where it does click and you do get it even more satisfying. In the very first level, there is a old boy style hallway fight where the camera pans out and it looks 2D as you're going from side to side. And it's funny, like the first time you do that, you might get your ass kicked a little bit, you might not pull off the combos very well, but the fourth or fifth time you go through that area, you're doing it like a movie. The choreography hands down. Who's going to attack you and kind of when, who you need to take out first, and there's a flow to it. So by the time you've done it 4 times, you do it in one smooth motion without being hit. And it's the repetition that makes it feel satisfying because you remember the first time you went through it and how that looked, and it didn't look as good. I think there's a really great thing about the level design. You asked me about this earlier, and from the 3 levels I played so far, each one is like visually striking, and it keeps it varied throughout. Even the club level that we're referring to isn't totally a club level. It does things that I won't spoil here. It changes and shifts, and it throws unexpected things at you, and I like that. I like that sense of, kind of jumping into these levels and having them almost be a roller coaster ride. It's not just kind of static. It feels dynamic, even though you are doing the same thing over and over again, which I do think helps kind of offset that repetition somewhat.
Well, my favorite level by far is the museum. Like the club's great, the music is thumping, but the fact that the museum is this full-on dream state, it really goes places. The boss battles go places. They have a lot of fun with designing just really visually, aesthetically memorable spaces. And yeah, the museum level just absolutely goes, and it's a lot of fun. But yeah, we'll hand it over down to the comments. Maybe you've picked up Sifu early, maybe you're picking it up today, but what's your general thoughts on the way that the game is presenting its difficulty if you've been playing it, or your general thoughts on the increased amount of difficulty we're seeing in recent games right now? For now, I've been Scott from WhatCulture.com.
I've been Josh from WhatCulture.com.
And we'll catch you next time.
Bye.
Bye-bye.